It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com, or you could just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you go to Spreaker.com, you find our guest, Susan Sparks Burns. She runs this organization called They Have No Voice. It's a Facebook group. Now, there's a Facebook page and a Facebook group, so make sure you ask to join the Facebook group if you have an interest.
Yes.
Or if you have a loved one in the Georgia State correction system, which is a disaster. But it's pretty much an example of the prison system all across the country. What do they call that? The correctional system, they call it, right? So Susan Sparks Burns, are you there?
I am, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Yes, Susan, thank you so much for coming back. Before we get into this whole story, because it's a really complicated story about this woman who they were selling her pictures, Beauty and the Beast, Hollywood. Remind the audience, who is Susan Sparks Burns?
And I am a corrections advocate. I did spend 40 years in the food industry. So sometimes I do, like many of us, revert to, some of my background for information in particular related to things that the correction system in Georgia could do a little better, you might say. But I got involved when my own son went to prison. And when I like to say, when he went to prison, I went to war. And I'm still in this battle. He has long since come home as a successful businessman. I couldn't be prouder of him. But I stayed involved because of what I saw in the system. It's indescribable until you're actually involved in it. And once you're involved in it, it's like being in a hay baler or something. It's not looking good up ahead, Every time something happens, there's a worse side to it than you ever imagined. And that goes for everyone who's got a loved one inside. It's hard to say it.
Yeah, and also, too, if you're involved in a correction system, either as an inmate or as a family member, you're really a second-class citizen, and people look down on you. There's a stigma. And, well, you deserve it. They get too much. Oh, these kids are coddled. They're 3 hots in a cot. It's so easy on them. All they get is a slap on the wrist. You hear these things, and it really couldn't be further from the truth. But also, too, in your group, They Have No Voice, the Facebook group, it's not a group of people, disgruntled people saying, oh, my loved one is innocent. We're wrongly convicted. And we cover those shows here all the time, and there's plenty of people who are wrongly convicted, too, as well. But for the most part, these are people just dealing with a loved one in prison and just hoping and praying for some kind of humane conditions, some kind of information. There's so much confusion and little information that comes out of these places and lack of information. What do we find? If we're going to join your group there, They Have No Voice on Facebook, what are we going to find there?
We are more than 5,100 people who are unique in the United States in that we are focused on a single law. It's called CRIPA, C-R-I-P-A, the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act. It was enacted after Willowbrook back in the 60s, 70s, when Geraldo Rivera became famous for his expose on this mental health hospital, so-called hospital in New Jersey, where people were just lying around in their own feces and naked and just horrendous conditions. From that came our law that grants civil rights. And this isn't racial civil rights. That's a different law, 64. This is civil rights of the institutionalized people. And in large part, that is the conditions that they're held in as well as how they are treated. In fact, the correction officer's job is to protect, to protect the inmates. And that is, so that job is so corrupted. I don't believe that anyone thinks that that is what is going on, or that the officers think that that's their job. But by law, it is. We played a significant role, I'd like to believe, in compelling the DOJ to open this investigation. The investigation opened in September of 2021. And from that moment, the Georgia Department of Corrections has been digging in their heels and fighting in federal court. The DOJ began its visit to the state prison. Now, this is a historical investigation. All 35 state prisons are under investigation in Georgia. Alabama previously was the largest such investigation. It's still ongoing, and it is 13 state prisons. It's the men's prisons, but only 13 of them. Much smaller system, far more overcrowded, but their prisons are built for like 500 people, and they're housing between 1,000 and 1,500. Our prisons here in Georgia, for the most part, the high security prisons, are built for about 1,200 in general. And they thanks to COVID, they are actually housing about that many. But the conditions, I get emails and messages day and night. And just today, someone asked me, what am I supposed to do? My husband's in a dorm. There's 60 men, 1 toilet, and 3 showers. What we've done is prepare templates so that it helps. Dear Warden so-and-so, I'd like you this afternoon to bring to your attention a subject you may not be aware of. Dorm J4 is without water, toilet, whatever it happens to be. And we try to keep it short, simple, respectful, and still be effective. And in large part, it is effective. But that's like playing whack-a-mole with the prison system. In addition, all 35 prisons all have some little medical department or maybe some larger medical, but that's usually the only thing that's air conditioned. We're in Georgia. It's hot here in the summer. So that's one of the conditions the DOJ is quite interested in. We have cells that are in the range of 105 to 110 in July and August.
Let me ask you a question, Susan. A lot of times when I'm reading and I do visit the page quite often. I only contribute occasionally. But a lot of times you'll have an inmate like whistleblow on a situation, and their name will be used. Now, do these people suffer reprisals for coming forward with information?
Wow. And we ask them not to use their names.
Yeah.
We ask their loved ones to not use their names, to protect themselves. I myself had a stalker earlier this year who was someone recently released from prison, and he made it clear he knew where I lived and that he did not any longer look like his picture. And that was a first, and it scared me. Not everybody in prison is a good person. Many of them are. Many of them I would invite to have dinner at my house in a heartbeat. Many of them are actually where they belong too. Not in the conditions that they belong to be held in, but some of them are pretty scary people. I don't want them coming to my house.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. Now, as hard as this may be for the average person to believe, but here you have a loved one who's in prison. The whole family, that is turned upside down. It's not just one person in prison. The whole family's affected.
Yes.
Plus the victims. And then you have people that are predators that are preying on these poor families, and they contact them and they say, hey, for a little bit of money, we can get you parole, or your loved one's about to be paroled, and then there's these fees to get the ankle monitor. Do you see these scams often?
Yes. The ankle monitor scam is coming up at least once a week. And if we're hearing about it that much, it's got to be 10 times that much. And in addition to that, the extortion is unbelievable. One of the things, I don't know psychologically how this happens, but it appears that people who are really good at being predators are also very good at identifying their potential victims. For example, when a new group of people come into a large open dorm at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison at Jackson. Let's say it's 100 people and 50 new ones come in. Those 50 that are in there immediately size up who can be extorted. And they go to them, they will get their mother's phone number from them one way or another, whatever it takes. They'll call that mother and say, we are going to do this or that. We are going to tattoo your son's entire face. That has happened. We are going to rape your son. We are going to starve your son, lock him in his cell, and when we take him out, we'll beat him. And we'll do it until he dies. And they start small. $50 tonight. We'll protect him for $50 a day. We'll protect him for $100 a day. They're beating him, and you're believing this? Our recommendation has consistently been, don't start paying it. Don't pay it. Don't pay it. Whatever, if there's any message I can give to people out there who have someone in the jail to prison pipeline, if they have a loved one in jail who is likely or is going to go to prison, tell that person, their son or daughter, loved one, husband, do not give up anything. Go hungry before you accept a crack from anybody. Go hungry. Don't accept anything. Don't gamble. You can be a side man. Don't gamble. Don't do anything that involves money or sets you up to get beaten, and because they will beat your mother's phone number out of you. And there's no one except maybe a grandmother who is more vulnerable to the extortion. And I know people who have paid $12,000 in 4 months to women who are extorting them for their daughters. The daughter may be a drug addict. The daughter may have other types of problems. But thousands of dollars from people who have nothing. They're on disability and live in a shack in the mountains. They've hit up all their relatives, and they're still being told, we're going to kill your child.
Yeah, and often, too, these prison gangs, they have members on the outside, too, as well. So you have that whole issue as well.
Yes.
But moving back to this, the tether, the ankle monitor scams. Now, the people being contacted about this kind of thing, if they had some kind of way to contact the prison, there was a liaison they could pick up the phone and talk to, a lot of that stuff would just be wiped out or reduced very quickly, right?
It's virtually impossible to contact the prison, but the prison isn't where this comes from. Well, that's where it's originated. But in real life, the department, there are 3 departments that are involved here in Georgia. Department of Corrections, that one's obvious. Department of Pardons and Paroles, That one's kind of obvious. And then there's a third department that is the Department of Community Supervision. But people don't call it that. Colloquially, they call it parole. Parole's coming to my house to check, to do a residency check to make sure the person's really living there. They call it parole, but it isn't. So these people get calls and they say, I'm from parole and we're going to charge you $957 for an ankle monitor, but we've got good news for you. We're going to let your son out next week. $957 to get your child out next week instead of next decade. They're on it like white on rice. They're very vulnerable to that scam, and it doesn't hold up. As it turns out, that department is not going to call you. If they come by, they're going to just come by. And they don't call and make a deal with you. And in a couple of cases, they've actually given the same name to people. Mr. Johnson, for example. And I said, this is Mr. Johnson from parole. $957 is, I don't know where they pulled that number out of. But it is rampant right now. And it's very hard to have people come to their, keep their wits about them when that's being dangled in front of them that their loved one can come home.
Right, and then also, too, in many states, the Department of Corrections website is so confusing. There's a pending exit date, there's a pending release date, there's a parole hearing. You can't figure out what the hell is going on. Then they're telling you, oh, this date's going to keep being reduced because there's good time and there's work time. But there's no, it makes no sense. Even if you're looking at this thing every week, you can't figure out when the hell this guy's getting out.
But in reality, it's a moving target. And then they layer on top of that a 2-page list of acronyms that they are using in this. The PED, you can't figure it out. It's ridiculous because it is so difficult. It would actually be better without the acronyms instead of making it simpler. It's simpler for them because they use the acronyms all the time. But for your average mother or grandmother out here, they don't know what somebody's talking about when they start saying PED, the parole eligibility date, which is not the parole eligibility date. It actually is the date that the parole department will begin looking at their eligibility. It's an inward-facing date, not outward. And people don't understand that it doesn't have anything to do with them or their child.
Yeah, and they tell you right up front that this pending exit date, that's not going to be the date. Okay, it's got to be less than that because it's good time and work time. So right off the bat, they're telling you, hey, the numbers we're giving you aren't the real numbers. It's just unbelievable. If people only knew.
They dangle a carrot out there for something called PIC, P-I-C, PIC points. And that's a free month off your sentence for every class that you can complete towards your case plan, for every job that you hold for a year, and you can get an unlimited amount of PIC points, except they will only apply 12 PIC points. So you really can only get 1 year off. And then when you get to your potential parole date minus a year and you're thinking, you're rubbing your hands, oh, man, I'm going to get out of here. 12 months off of my date, I'm packing my bags. And they say, we forgot to tell you 13 years ago that you're not eligible for the PIC points that you earned. They don't tell them that until it's time to apply them. And they wonder why these are angry and resentful people. I got a letter today from a woman whose husband has been denied parole 29 times. He's been in 40 years.
Wow.
He's eligible for parole.
We just did a show recently about this fellow, Shane Valentine, back in Nevada, who was obviously a police informant at this point. We've identified that. But the home invasion, burglary, all these charges, shooting into a structure, all these charges. And we can't even figure out how much time he really did in prison. Everything's been less than 2 years. But with all these different dates, you can't even figure out what did this guy actually do, And you can't even figure it out. And these are people who are in the business, know what they're talking about.
I see it regularly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Susan, we just had you on recently. We were talking about Daniel Ferguson, this repeated, but practically a serial killer there in the prison system, and basically allowed to do whatever he wants.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, then James Mitchell, who died of dehydration and heat exposure on one of these punishment cages, about how Bloods and Crips have relationships with the corrections officers. And you were telling us the story about education, Beauty and the Beast, and Hollywood. Now, what is this story?
All right. The Georgia, like many prison systems, is very, in fact, critically poorly staffed. Staffing is as low as 75% below what is required. Now you have to have, like, if you get federal aid for federal grants to teach something, you actually have to teach it. And in this case, it's the GED, the high school equivalency. If you get aid to teach that, you have to have a teacher who actually teaches it. So Pulaski State Prison is one of four women's prisons in Georgia. And it's a fairly large prison, and is considered to be a fairly rough prison for reasons that predate this story. A young man, 5 months out of college, was hired as a GED instructor at Pulaski State Prison. And he was there to improve the lives, to rehabilitate, so to speak, young women. And he was also unsupervised when those women were in his presence. It didn't take very long at all for a really beautiful young woman to convince him to begin to take a phone call from a person that has never been identified publicly, who is obviously a Blood. And the Blood brings to the young man, Deshaun Melvin is his name, brings to him an assortment of drugs. And Deshaun Melvin brings it in. Some of it is something kind of interesting here in Georgia. I suppose it's everywhere, but cardstock gets soaked in Suboxone or K2, synthetic marijuana. Or here in Georgia, we're cheap and we use what we've got. They soak it in Raid insecticide.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah. And then Deshaun Melvin was caught bringing in 10 pages of cardstock that had been soaked in a substance. And when they searched his car, he had meth, amphetamine, downers. He had 20 different kinds of pills in his car. And so he was going to bring those in as well. And he is not a savvy criminal, because he copped all of it right away. And he implicated the person who talked him into it. And that was this beautiful, she is Selena Holmes. And she is gorgeous. And he says, of course, that she approached him to take the phone call, and then in exchange for bringing in the drugs, he got $1,000 per drop every time he brought them in. And it was estimated that he was getting 4 of these drops in a month, let's just say $4,000 a month income up above his salary. And he had kind of he was able to he asked Selena Holmes, according to the court records, could he touch her buttocks and private areas and her breasts, and she said, well, why don't you try and find out? And after he did that, he took pictures of her with his state laptop, which he proceeded to text and send out to his friends. And we asked how they got caught. So he actually got a pass for the major crimes here. He did implicate the 6 other women, 7 women total, and the Department of Corrections, of course, has made no comment on this. Miss Holmes had a first offender plea. That means that when she served her time, her charges could be expunged. And while she's serving her time, the charges are still, her convictions are still present to the vision of law enforcement, but not to the public. So when you would look her up, it wouldn't show her as being in prison. Well, she had a 15-year sentence that she had to serve for being involved in a hit in Atlanta. As it turns out, Ms. Holmes had I may get this wrong, but you'll get the idea. She was called the Yap Princess, and it was young and paid. But she had never met the man that she was working with. She was the girlfriend, I guess is kind of a loose word for it, of a man named Arthur Cofield, who was in the HIMAX, in the SMU in Georgia, with access to many, many dozens of cell phones. When a phone was taken away from him, he actually responded, I don't give a you-know-what. I've had thousands of cell phones. So,
well, let me just back up here for a second. This woman here, Selena, where is it again? The full name is what? Selena?
Holmes.
Selena Holmes, right. I just looked up some pictures of her. You're right. Yeah. She is very beautiful. Selena Holmes had charges of some type of conspiracy to commit murder with this other fellow, Caulfield. But yet this minor cooperation over this prison employee smuggling in these drugs, she was able to have that conspiracy to commit murder expunged from her record?
Actually, the county, Fulton County, took her to court to try to get her first offender plea removed, so that she would indeed not be able to get that expunged and would be able to be searched in the prison system in the inmate lookup, and you would see what she had been convicted of.
Very interesting. Quick question, Susan. A quick question, Susan.
Yeah.
Now, if you couldn't look her up in the Department of Corrections website, right, or in the prison website, what about her court cases? Were you still able to look that up in the county court records?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So in the end, Fulton County caved, and they allowed her to keep her first offender plea for that. For her involvement. She actually went on the hit.
Wow.
And they let her keep the first offender plea. I'm not even going to begin to guess what went on with that negotiation.
Well, it would appear to me that rather than her wonderful cooperation in this other case, that perhaps her relationship with this fellow Caulfield with all the cell phones And as you see in this article you sent here, I see the figure $11 million. Okay, right off the top of could it possibly have been Susan? I know, this is outrageous, but it could possibly have been her relationship with this Caulfield and his high dollar crimes that got her this sweet arrangement?
You bet. Yes and no. The real sweet arrangement is that she didn't lose her first offender plea because she is to date the only person who was charged in that hit.
Wow.
So, in a sense, she got a slap on the wrist, and you got to go. Well, we're going to talk about Caulfield, but this is this crazy arrangement. They pulled Melvin into court. Now, this guy, this has got to be, but I'm going to say it because you can look at the picture and see it. He appears to be quite rotund, and he must have thought he had hit the golden ticket or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they bring him into court, and he spills his guts. He has immunity for his testimony, and in the end, he gets 4 chicken you-know-what charges in the county where the prison is. He's going to go to prison, but he's not going to spend much time there. He may be somebody's boyfriend,
right.
girlfriend, while he's there. But anyway, even people who were on the side of the law in this said, if you could get an extra $4,000 a month times 12 months, wouldn't you do it? Regarding him, wow.
Yeah, so true. And he is like 6'7" or something like that. Let me take another look. Yeah, this guy's over 6'7". He's close to 6'8". I think he's right on the line of 6'8". I got a little ruler next to his picture here. And plus, he's friends with all the correction officers in there. I don't think he's gonna have too much of a hard time in there. There really are a lot of cameras in prison. Now, what the prison systems always say is, oh, that camera had been covered with Vaseline. We couldn't see anything. Yeah.
Are you kidding me? I have not looked up Sean Melvin's height, but just because I can, I will look that up at some point. But it's very common for those rulers to be very misplaced.
Oh, gotcha.
It's often intentional.
Okay. Oh, that's very interesting. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So now, what is the story then with this Caulfield fellow and all the money he took from Mr. Sidney Kimmel?
Okay, Sidney Kimmel, as far as I know, is unrelated to Jimmy Kimmel, but Sidney Kimmel is the owner of Jones New York, I believe, the fashion company, and he's 94 years old. And 2 of the movies, they listed 3, but 2 of them I had seen, Crazy Rich Asians and Moneyball, one of my favorite movies. And he was the chairman of Sidney Kimmel Entertainment and produced those movies. So Arthur Caulfield somehow, he is what you call a physically unattractive man, but lucky in love. He convinced customer service at Charles Schwab that he was a 94-year-old man, Kimmel, and he arranged to have $11 million wired to a company in Idaho, and then he charged a private plane to transport the 6,106 American Eagle gold coins that he got for his $11 million. To transport that to Atlanta, and $4.4 million of that was used to buy a house that was under construction in Buckhead, a very ritzy end of Atlanta. The neighbors in Buckhead have now put up all these fast-growing trees that will shield the boarded-up mansions next door.
Wow.
It's actually, I would hate to live there and have paid $5 million for my house. But Caulfield pled not guilty, of course, but the federal government picked him up in 2020. He is no longer at the SNU. He is quite interesting. There were other people, and that came out thanks to the AJC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's work on this. Other people were victims as well, including other people involved in Hollywood. Those cases haven't come to trial. The curious thing about Sidney Kimmel, once he found out he'd been defrauded, every dime was returned to him between Schwab and the other banks that were involved. He did not lose a dime. I mean, good for him. I'd be upset over $1,100, much less $11 million. So, meanwhile, while this is all going on, Cofield apparently had other women as well who were how Selena Holmes was his girlfriend. She would have sex with men and live stream it to him in the SNU.
Wow.
Yeah.
On what type of device? He had like an iPad?
If you could get, as he said, 1,000 phones, you could probably get any.
Yeah, no, I forgot about the phones. Yeah, I forgot about the iPhones. Yeah, he had a bunch of iPhones. Yeah.
They actually interviewed the man who is retired from Department of Corrections, but he was the warden at the SNU at the time. He said you could not keep phones from this man because he would pay whatever it took to get the phones.
Yeah, but those cell phone jammers, they cost $250 a piece, okay? And they have a very wide range. There's really no excuse for that. They claim that the corrections officers need to use their phones, and that's why they don't jam them. But they jam them in other countries. So that's a whole nother story.
Some of our prisons here in Georgia are actually backed up within, like across the street or on the adjacent property, fire stations and police. So we've got kind of a complicated situation here. Georgia has some workarounds. They have these mobile units that they can back into place and connect outside of the fence and be able to, in prime time phone usage, harvest the device that number that's printed on the back of your phone.
Yeah.
They can harvest those numbers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they've got to actually get the phone and compare it to the list of what they've got. And that's not as easy as it sounds like. It's not like everybody's sitting around holding their phones. A lot of them take the phones apart, take their SIM cards out, store the phone in one area, the card in another area, but sure as hell, neither of those things are in their cell. So it's pretty hard sometimes to put those together until they have the physical device with the cell phone. And then they've got all the pictures and so forth. The fact of the matter is that the cell phones in Georgia are not the devil. The cell phones are the reason that we were able to convince the Department of Correction, the Department of Justice, that there was a terrible, terrible problem here in Georgia in terms of conditions and treatment. We had a riot, and it's good for another show. A riot on the day that they fired the warden at Smith State Prison. They announced it like at 8 p.m. and the riot began within minutes. And it was at least 40 men chasing one, and there were other people who were injured in it. But that man he is still under medical care. He's out of the hospital and in medical care in one of the prisons. But the victim, and the victim had a long history of being a person who would injure other people.
Gotcha.
Okay. So,
now, with your group here, they have no voice here in Georgia. Are you aware of other groups, similar groups in other states that are doing the same kind of work as you're doing?
not in terms of CRIPA. My goal, my personal goal for me and for me is to take this template to other states, and I've been working to connect with other advocates in other states, because if there's a chance, it's an off chance, but it's a decent off chance. If all the states had a group that's advocating based on CRIPA, that the DOJ would have a far easier time connecting these cases, connecting the investigations. And I give you a simple example. I mentioned Alabama's investigation. It started in 2016, and Alabama did what any Department of Corrections in the South would do. It hired Maynard Cooper, a law firm out of Alabama, curiously enough, and it's led by William Lunsford, attorney at law, who is he's also the counsel to the National Association of Corrections Officials, so they know his name. He's the first guy they call when they get that notice that they're being investigated by the DOJ. And what's going on in Georgia, and I mentioned they've been digging in their heels from day one. They are using his playbook from Alabama, and that amounts to delay, deny, and obfuscate. And it's been effective so far. A year and a half, almost 2 years into this, the DOJ has not been permitted to speak to a Georgia Department of Corrections employee.
Is that because of the unions?
No, there's no union here.
There's no union.
No, it's because of vigorous representation in federal court by Lunsford with Maynard Cooper.
Gotcha.
He's good.
Yeah.
The guy's good.
Now you sent me some other material too about a record that revealed 57 Georgia prison inmates slain. What do you know about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. That number has been revised in the last few weeks to 60. That is in the last 2 years. And in fact, it's, the homicide total for 3 is stated at 90. Now with the 3 additionals, it's 97 for the last 3 years total. That's more than the last 30 is more than the 3 years that preceded these 3 years. This is a tripling of the number of homicides. And what's curious there, due to COVID, the number of incarcerated people in Georgia was reduced by 20%. So our effective rate, they normalize these rates to a rate per 100,000, so that you're talking apples and apples. The rate has gone from, in 2017, the rate was 235 homicides per 100,000 inmates. It has gone to 506.
And you're talking about there were some provisions under COVID. I think it was called hardship release, where many inmates were released to home confinement and stuff like that due to COVID. Now,
None were released in Georgia.
None?
None.
Really?
None.
Wow.
The ACLU requested 2 people. One was a man who was 83 years old, had quadruple bypass, had diabetes, all, yeah, the usual stuff you have at 83. They said they would review him when his time comes in 2033, I believe, is when his parole date comes up.
That's fascinating. Later on after this interview, I'm being interviewed about the Stormy Daniels case. And so many people involved in that, Michael Avenatti, Michael Cohen, and Lev Parnas, they all got this hardship release due to COVID. They all got these sentences, but then wound up spending it at home.
Were they all in federal?
I think they were all in federal. No. Avenatti may not have been in federal. Avenatti may have been in California state. But again, that's a different world in Georgia too.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's not good there either in prison.
Yeah.
So.
Susan Sparks Burns, we only got about 5 minutes left. You sent me this other thing too, about 200 Georgia prison employees arrested on John-related charges. Now that seems pretty rampant. Like an epidemic, you might call it.
Yes, I think it rises to epidemic.
Yeah.
And most of them are corrections officers. Of those corrections officers, when you dig deeper, you'll find that around 2/3 of them were females. And it's a worthwhile conversation having, but it isn't being had in Georgia. Why we have young women age 18 to 25 who are corrections officers in level 5 prisons with men. What they find is the women, should a need arise to break up a fight, no way, Jose, that's not happening. It's alleged that some of the women who work there have relationships that predate their employment with people who are incarcerated there. Others go there possibly to find someone to have a relationship with. Some officers have been alleged to have actually given prices, some female officers, given prices to male prisoners for what they do in what amount of time. The time is 30 minutes, by the way. Yeah. I used to be pretty naive about this stuff. Not anymore.
And when you say that,
it's not good.
Yeah, and again, too, it has to do with the gang relationships, the gang infiltration in the corrections offices.
The gangs often recruit these women, and essentially by the time this comes up, they must get the job at the prison, and they are essentially what we used to call mules.
Yeah.
Bringing in greeting cards, token raid, or whatever it may be. In fact, now a male officer up at Lee Arrendale State Prison, a women's prison with 1,200 inmates, last year a male officer was caught bringing in a pack of 300 pages of cardstock that had been soaked. What they call them is strips. They tear them into strips. You know how paper will only tear in one direction?
Sure.
They tear them into strips like a 1/4 inch wide, roll them up tight, and smoke them. And it gives you a high. In Georgia, they call it strips. It gives you a high that is sort of like the worst LSD you've ever heard of, where there's they get naked, they jump around, they run from each other, they throw up. We have many videos of it, and on YouTube, you can see it. It's called Strip Life, and you'll see people doing strips. And there's one that's infamous of men in one of the Georgia prisons, and they're sitting on these long black benches, and they're sharing what looks like a joint, but it's had a strip inside it, and they're sharing that, and they start tumbling off the bench onto the floor.
Wow.
Some of them have seizures. It is just, I mean, some of them like are losing their shoes when they tumble off the bench.
Susan Sparks Burns, believe it or not, we're out of time. Okay, it's just time flies. Yeah. I know, right? They Have No Voice. You can find the Facebook group. It's called They Have No Voice. Now, one thing to keep in mind real quick before we go, we got like 30 seconds, is people may be saying, "Oh, Ed, these people are never getting out of prison. They're all low lives. They're all criminals, and their families are criminals." The corrections officers who work in this system of corruption and abuse and inhumane treatment on a daily basis are fed into the police department. Okay, many guys before they become a cop, they were corrections officers. Okay, but even before that, they were in the military. So this is really serious business. The guys patrolling your streets, okay, answering a call when your daughter's being raped, has been in this kind of corruption up to there. And
correction.
Yeah.
Annual corrections officer turnover in Georgia is 47%.
Yeah.
They're on their way to your local police department now.
Right. And if there wasn't so much money and all this stuff, the strips and the prostitution and stuff like that, and the phones, all this could be easily put a stop to. Even this whole con game with these tethers and stuff like that, all this could be put a stop to easily. Susan Sparks Burns, thank you so much. Something new comes up, give us a call. We'll put you right back on the air.
Awesome, Ed. Nice to talk with you again.
You too, ma'am. Thank you.